How you doing, YouTube? This is part one of the Panzer brake reinstallation. The first thing that I did was I actually took the brake drum, slipped it onto the axle shaft prior to putting the backing plate on, that way I can make sure I have enough clearance between the back of the brake drum hub area and the seal, the grease seal, oil seal that I wanted to install into the backing plate to keep the gear lube from the rear end being dribbling into the brake system. So what I did was I actually have already installed one here. I'll show you how I did it. The seal that I found that looks to be as if it would work perfectly is a CR seal number. I can see we got the number for you. There it is, 13797. That is the seal that works for me. I have enough room between the back of the drum to the seal itself, therefore I can run a seal on my rear. As you can tell, there's the seal, it's in. What I had to do is I had to press it in from the back side because this one happens to have these little dimples here, here, and here, and four like little peen marks to keep the seal from actually coming all the way through. So I would have had to take the brake backing plate off anyways in order to get that seal in. Essentially pretty simple. Just got my Dake press. I wasn't gonna try to hammer a seal that big in, so Dake press, I just kind of lined it up. I happen to have this old aluminum pulley which is pretty big. I just put, obviously laid the seal in there, made sure it's fairly straight, put the pulley on top of it, and then just crank down on it with the press. I prefer these Dake presses over like a hydraulic press because I feel as if I have more control. But essentially just pressed it in, and once it was flush with the backing plate, installed. For the second part of the brake install, what we're going to do is we're actually going to install the backing plate back onto the axle. One thing I do when I install like a new rubber seal is just to take a little oil, lube up this area, especially along the keyway. Make sure there's no sharp edges, but just lube it up with some oil. In this case I'm just using engine oil, whatever I had in stock. It doesn't have to be the actual gear lube. Now, putting a seal here is not going to eliminate weeping from the axle. I mean, eventually gear lube is going to weep out of the shims that are in the back, but at least it will keep it from going into the actual brake pads. Just give it a good, I like to give it just a good lubing, so that way that rubber seal slides on real nice. Slide that on, lining up your holes, and then just kind of working it on. And then there it is. Your seal's in place. Obviously this is falling because it doesn't have a spring retention. Put on your lock washers, mounting nuts, like that. Pretty simple. I mean, just putting on the screw on the nuts. Get your appropriate socket, tighten them down. The next step in putting the brake back together is the wheel cylinder. In this case, this tractor has one of the modified wheel cylinders compared to the actual bar that the later model have. So in order to do that, we're going to take our wheel cylinder, slide that back into place. Might have to just finagle the arm a little bit. Take your bolts and just hand start them into the back. This one happens to have 1/2-inch bolts, so we're just going to install these bolts in the back. The two apologize for my camera work here, but the two bolts come in from the back. They screw into the threads of the wheel cylinder. Once you have those two bolts in, it's lined up, tighten it down. The next thing I do is I want to test fit the brake shoe to make sure that it's going to work. One of the things is this tab here provides pressure on the shoe to keep it against the backing plate. Now, typically these are pretty tight. They're really for a car, automotive setup, so the brake shoe doesn't move around. But with this tractor, or with the tractor setup that it's on, it doesn't really need to be that tight. As I think it was Bill Janitor that said it best, that if you're a puller, you don't want a lot of drag from the brake shoes on your drums. In the same respect, you want your brakes to engage and disengage very easily. This is a culprit. This creates drag. One thing I like to do every once in a while, if they're real bad, is just to kind of take a crowbar and give that thing a tug in order to kind of bend it out. The other thing I'll do is I'll get the shoe, take a crowbar, because this sometimes has some tension to it, pull the tab out in order to until the shoe's in place, and you can actually see it. It's making a mark, and there's quite a bit of drag there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this out a little bit more from the other direction in order to give me the right amount of tension to hold the shoe against to hold it against the backing plate. You got to remember the plunger that goes in here has like a U shape, and that will clip into the top of the brake shoe. I'll show you that very shortly. The next part that I jump into is the brake shoe plunger that rides inside the old brake cylinder, made up of three components: the plunger, the adjuster screw, and the adjuster tension spring. First thing I like to do is take the screw, run a rethreading nut over it just to make sure that the threads are clean. Next, I'll take a little bit of anti-seize, give that a little touch. That's actually more than what I want and on there anyway, so I'll just wipe that off. Next, or probably should have done it first, is take a piece of sandpaper and hit the top of this. Make sure you get most, if not all, of the corrosion off the top of that, because that is the pivot point of where the actual brake lever arm pushes against. Clearly it's fairly easy. Just drop the spring on, then you screw the adjuster screw back into the plunger. Give it a couple twists, set, do a little baby amount of preload on the spring, and that's it. That's ready to install. Next, we're going to install the brake cylinder, or the brake plunger in the brake cylinder. For this, what I want to do is I want to lubricate this brake cylinder. So I'll take a little bearing grease, put it up in the cylinder, give it a quick little wipe, kind of like that. It doesn't need a ton, just needs to be lubricated. That way that plunger doesn't bind up when it goes up and down. So give it a little bit of a greasy touch. Next, I want to grease up the plunger, again, just give it a little bit of grease, that way, and I'm just using wheel bearing grease. It doesn't, it doesn't need to be really crazy. So that, make sure you have a paper towel handy. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually install this. Make sure the U is pointed in the front position. Not that you can't adjust it when you put the brake shoe in, but it just makes life a little easier to do that right now. I'm going to slide that up in there. Make sure that, it's moving freely. There we go. It's not going to stay. So. There we go. Okay, for right now that's good enough. Next, you take your brake shoe. One thing I like to do is just put a little bit of grease on this pivot, so that way the brake shoe will move freely. Plus, lubricates that up. Where the tab is going to touch the brake shoe, I want to just put a little bit of grease there, and obviously on the back. That way it'll move freely. We're going to not put our thumb in the grease like I just did. Don't touch the shoe itself, obviously. Put it on your pivot. Push your plunger up. Let's get the plunger up. There we go. We'll grab our crowbar real quick. Pull out our tab and kind of send it all home at once. There it is. And there you go. Preliminarily, there it is. It's pretty much all put back into there, and it actually felt pretty good, so I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, next we're going to put the clip in, we're going to get the spring, we're going to get this thing done. Okay, next is to install the clip that holds the pivot in place for the brake pad, or I should say shoe, my mistake. Just going to use what I have here. Make sure it's seated, and it is. That's seated completely. Wipe off the grease. We don't need any excess grease hanging around, so we get rid of all that. Next is the fun part, in my opinion. We have to do the spring. Spring clips into the hole here, and then is dragged up to the pivot point right here. So for whatever reason, I can't find my brake spring installer tool, so I'm going to go kind of dangerous old school here with my pair of vice grips. Hopefully you see this and I still have all my teeth at the end of the day. Ooh, alright. This bad boy has a lot of tension on it, so my hands filled with grease too. Okay, let's try this. We're gonna launch its ass. Come on. See what I mean? This is real world stuff here. This isn't like edited crap that you see on YouTube all the time. Let's pray. Oh, I guess not. Okay, back to the drawing boards. Okay, take two on the spring. Two things. One, my hands were filled with grease, so I couldn't grip this thing. And the second thing is this hook end of it was pretty shallow, so I took it and just bent it a little bit so it would grip on a little more. Hook the spring into the hole, put your foot on the thing, lift up, and hook it on. And there it is. It's installed. So let's see how this works. Hopefully I don't have to pan out again, but there you go. Looks as if we need to do a little bit of adjustment because but look at that. That works pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust that up a little bit so that foot pedal is up a little bit more. There's some tension on this brake arm, and then we'll go from there. Alright, next is some brake adjustment, and then we'll adjust the shoes. Okay, the next part we're going to do is we're actually going to install the brake drum. And two things when we do this is, one, we're going to install the brake drum and make sure that there's no drag by the brake pads. If you want a little bit of drag, I mean very little light hint, so that way when you depress the pedal, the brakes come on right away. That's perfectly fine. I don't want any drag by the brakes. Number one, these things don't go that fast, so, and if you're going to be a puller, you're going to pull your, use your tractor for pulling, you're not going to want any drag anyways, because that's a loss of horsepower. Put the key in place, grab the brake drum, make sure that, I like to have the keys pointed straight up, so that way you can just easily slide it on, which it's going to go on real easy. There it is. I'm giving it a spin. There's absolutely no drag from the brake pad, so for me that's fine. I'm just going to check my key, make sure the key's good. It is. I'm going to set it back in. I can see the key, it's right there at the edge. I'm going to check it again. There's no drag whatsoever, but if I put the pedal on, you know, the more I depress it, the harder it sticks, and it's back off. So we're good. I feel real good about that. Put the I got a new washer. Bought a brand new grade 8 bolt for it, so that way it just looks good. I'm going to put just a there it is. I'm just going to get my adjustable wrench. I'm going to put just a hair of preload onto this nut. I mean, just a little bit, just to seat the drum on the tapered shaft. That's it. I want to be able, if I ever have to get into this, I want to be able to get this brake drum off with just the slide hammer. One of the reasons you don't crank those nuts down on the axle is this. I forgot to say one thing. You really shouldn't crank the nuts down when you put the brake drums on, because you may have to adjust these wheel cylinders in order to get the brake pedals to look nice and even. This side's all back together. It's kind of interesting because this one here is probably not adjusted much, but it gives just enough pressure on the block to hold it against the, I guess the stop, if you want to call it that. But when you push the pedal, everything returns, and it returns the stop, returns it back, right? The spring right to the top. Also with this, you know, it returns it right away back. But the problem, this one here is adjusted way up. So it's just a matter of playing with it. The next thing to do is to actually install the drums, and that's what I'm going to do right now. Well, here it is, guys. The brakes and rear wheels are done. I apologize for the tight, crazy camera work here, but my garage is so filled with junk. It's really tight in here, so I don't have a lot of range for the camera, but everything's done. Everything's back together. Everything went back together real nice. As you can tell, I got some new hardware, put new grade 8 bolts in, and then obviously the nut and the washer I replaced. I think it gives it a better look than the rusted bolts. Both brake pedals are approximately in the same spot. They approximately have the same feel too. I believe this one goes down maybe 1/8 of an inch more compared to that, but basically I have it adjusted. This brake, this brake is fully disengaged. There's absolutely no drag on the tire on this brake. This brake here, for whatever reason, must have been the way it's set up with the adjustment. This one drags in one little spot, just a hair, just enough to slow the rim down. But I sanded the pad down a little bit to alleviate that, and I just wasn't gonna sand it down anymore. It'll wear in, or you know, it's really not that big of a deal. This is not a pulling tractor, so I'm not too concerned about it. But as you can tell, both foot pedals have been adjusted to about the same height. Maybe this one's a hair down lower, but not enough for me to worry about. So, well, there it is. That's the way I did the brakes. Hopefully you enjoyed this, found it interesting. Sorry for it to be kind of long, but I think this is only the second brake video of a Panzer that's on YouTube. I know Bill Janitor did one, but this is only the second one that I know of. Alright, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you watching. And I think the next thing we'll be doing next thing I'll be doing is the front end. Thanks, bye.